Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I am your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 139 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I am here in Lander, Wyoming, though I won't be for long. I'm headed out on the road very soon, in just a few days. I'm going to fly to Vegas for a podcast interview. I'm flying to Vegas for one podcast interview because a lot of you have asked for this interview, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not going to tell you who it is right now. You're going to have to wait for that, but it'll be coming soon. And then I'm in Vegas briefly, and then I fly straight to San Francisco, where I will meet up with Nate, and we've got a couple of podcast interviews there, followed by on August 16th through the 18th, that's a Friday through a Sunday, at Bridges Rock Gym in El Cerrito, California. We will be conducting a coaches and youth team workshop, as well as parents. There will be a session for parents talking about the language that we use and how to promote a better mindset with youth climbers. So if you're a coach, if you're a youth athlete, definitely check out Bridges Rock Gym and sign up for that workshop. There are a few spots left, I believe, August 16th through the 18th. From there, I fly directly to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'll be working with Escape Climbing on a project that I'm really looking forward to. And I'll also be presenting at Minneapolis Bouldering Project, sort of workshopping, so to speak, a presentation that I'm building that's really about the top lessons I've learned over the 200 some hours of face-to-face conversations I've had with experts in doing this podcast. I've learned a lot over these last few years, and I hugely appreciate the support that all of you have given. Keep sharing it, keep putting it out there. It keeps growing, and I'm excited to keep it going. But I'm going to be talking at Minneapolis Bouldering Project Wednesday, August 21st at 7:30. And then I'll be hanging out at the brewery next door, just chatting with people, hanging out. So come out and see me Wednesday, August 21st, 7:30 at MBP. All right. Today's guest should not need an introduction, but because Americans don't really pay attention to what's going on elsewhere, I'm going to give him one anyway. His name should be mentioned along with the Tommy Caldwells and the Sonnie Trotters, those being the two examples we know here in North America as really amazing all-around climbers who can perform no matter what the rock type, no matter what the style, no matter if it's bouldering, trad, sport, big walls, alpine, doesn't matter. And today's guest, Lee Cossey, is one of those climbers. And I sat down in the Blue Mountains at Lee's house in Blackheath, and we discussed his philosophies as a climber, as a coach, as a business owner. And he's got some quirky philosophies. But that's what makes great climbers, the ability to think outside the box. Sitting in today for part of the conversation is Lee's partner, Andrea Hah. She was in and out because she was tending to baby Max now and then. And it's really great to have Andrea's perspective in here as well. And honestly, I look forward to going back to Blackheath and being able to talk one-on-one with Andrea as well. All right, let's get into it.
In those situations where you're confronted by lots of adversity, putting out 1,000 spot fires or something, I just really enjoy that sort of state of mind. There's no room for doubt or anything, you're just reacting.
This time to build power. This time to build
I think I've heard it before.
this time to
like, I didn't know a lot about you coming into this trip. I'd heard your name, but I didn't realize the breadth of what you'd done in climbing.
Okay.
And now I've been describing you as kind of Australia's Tommy Caldwell.
Okay.
But with all your fingers.
Yeah, exactly.
And because you're so well-rounded, you've got this massive base of experience in all sorts of styles of climbing.
Yeah.
Is that something that you like really thought about, or just something you fell into?
I very much fell into it. I think by nature I'm a pretty novelty-seeking kind of person, and I'm interested by a lot of things. I'm very details-orientated, but I really am quite curious about details on just about everything, and I like to give everything a go, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess too, the way that I was introduced to climbing probably had a big impact on where I've since gone, and that is that I was brought into climbing by an uncle who was a guide at Arapalis, and that's a very, very trad orientated area.
Yeah, and you grew up sort of in the Blue Mountains.
I grew up in the Blue
right?
Mountains, yeah, yeah. So Arapalis was a long way away, so I went there for a 2-week trip with my uncle who was a guide, and he just showed me the ropes completely on how to trad climb, and I think I was 14 at the time. So the introduction to climbing was super traditional, but I've come from this background of like, moderately high level gymnastics.
Right.
And then the other side of that was that I'm in the epicenter of what would become the Australian sport climbing capital, which is the Blue Mountains. At the time it wasn't, but it became that over my sort of first few years of climbing.
Yeah.
It went from being a bit of a backwater in Australia, not on the kind of, not on the radar in terms of a high volume of sport climbing, to having far, far, far more sport climbing than the rest of Australia put together. And so I guess it's a little bit serendipitous in that my introduction was trad, my hometown was a sport capital, and I have this background of being in kind of relatively high level of sport, I guess.
Yeah.
And so...
What is your sport background?
Oh, so gymnastics primarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were the same, Andrea, right? You were a gymnast.
Yeah, Andrea was a much higher level gymnast than I was.
Yeah, I think just growing up in Victoria and just being dedicated to that one sport, and I did it for 10 years. So, yeah.
Well, I think, it's interesting you say that, because when I was looking at your tick list, your resume, so to speak, and thinking about, well, I know he grew up in the Blue Mountains, and there's this entirely different ethic at Arapalis and the Grampians. It very much reminded me of, have you read The Talent Code? The Daniel Coyle book, where he talks about, these people who just happen to be in the right place
at the right time. Yeah.
At the right time. And like you said, it's sort of serendipitous that you're introduced to climbing and you live in this, what will become the mecca of climbing.
Yeah.
And I think the ethics of those three areas, from what I can see anyway, have sort of shaped the style that you climb in and the way that you climb. And I'm interested to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, very much. I guess I said, the Blue Mountains would become the sport climbing mecca.
Yeah.
And I guess it wasn't that at the time. But as kind of me and my peers, my brother and things like that kind of progressed through the grades, we've had this kind of, clean slate of amazing overhanging sandstone cliffs, but with no roots. And so automatically we're looking at new routes to do and starting to bolt and things like that. And once you become familiar with that process, you end up being the group of Australians who are bolting the next generation projects and climbing new levels, and whatever you bolt, you end up kind of rising to that challenge, and it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling kind of scenario, really. Yeah,
and when you're that age, it's almost limitless, like your belief in yourself. And definitely. And I think for me, I guess belief has never been a massive strong point, but I'm very rational, and I kind of see what goes on around me
I reflect on kind of what I'm able to do in certain situations and how I'm progressing, and can kind of extrapolate from that what I could be able to do in another season. So I wouldn't say, I'm just have this unwavering belief in my ability to do stuff. Not at all. But relatively pragmatic in kind of working towards something.
Yeah. And did your brother Ben start climbing at the same time, roughly?
Basically, yeah. So I think he, from the moment that I started going out every weekend on the rocks in the mountains, he was probably only a year behind that.
Okay.
Yeah.
In those first years, were you two competitive with each other?
In the first couple of years, not so much, because I had a more experience just from climbing with my uncle at Arapiles, and a bit more climbing in the gym, a bit more strength, another year and a half of development, you could say, except which he overtook me very quickly in that regard. So yeah, first couple of years, not so much. And then I got a pretty major injury in my elbow. It
opened the door for him.
Yeah, very much so. So I was 16 and had just climbed my first 30, which is like 13C or 8A plus. And basically had to have 4 months off climbing.
Yeah.
Came back to climbing. At that point, when I came back to climbing, Ben was better than me.
Right.
Yeah. And then I kind of caught up, overtook him again. And then I had to have my elbow operated on at the same time the following year, another sort of 3 or 4 months off. And then from that moment onwards, Ben has been able to out-boulder me on plastic easily off the couch ever since.
Well, maybe you don't even need that much belief when you have this like built-in competition right next to you all the time.
Absolutely. It may actually be one of the roots of my lack of belief. It's my very talented brother.
Well, I think it's built drive,
definitely,
if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which, if nothing else, is a good substitute for belief, if you're just willing to forge ahead.
Totally, yeah. And I think belief is one of those things that works differently for different people. If you're a particularly rational person, you don't trust belief for the sake of it. You know, it's just like, well, no, I want to work toward doing that. I will work toward doing that. I don't think I'll do it today, but I don't think I won't do it today. Yeah. It's just a different way of looking at things. And I think, a lot of people probably have recognized that in me in the past, that I am just, quite
logical in your approach.
Maybe to a fault sometimes, but
I think I'm the same way, and I think that helps me believe, because I can say I've put the work in, and I'm here prepared.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've done the best that I can to this point. So now let's put that to work and see what happens.
Definitely, yeah. And I think there's a flip side to belief, to having a sort of strong sense of belief in yourself, is that maybe you have more resources to actually break down some of the negative beliefs because they're not as strong. He's like, well, no, this is all evidence-based, so I'll just give it a a go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important way to approach things, actually.
Yeah.
And when you do fail on things, it doesn't become this reflection of who you are. It more becomes a reflection of what your process was.
Definitely.
And now you can make some changes and, come back.
Definitely, yeah. I think you're always going to be like emotionally tied to the things you're driven to do, though. And I think without that emotional kind of element to your goals, it's you won't have the drive to do it. And I think whenever emotion is involved, it's hard not to have the downs, like with things, but you bounce back. And that's why I feel like I kind of go through these phases of like, all right, really driven and want to do something, and then kind of if I feel like I fail, it's like it hits you in the heart. It takes a bit to bounce back, but you do bounce back. But that's me. It's sort of up and down.
Well, I think that's most of us. I don't know how anybody can stay up all the time, or if they do, are they really up that high?
Maybe. I don't
know. So I was just in the Gramps and very, very briefly at Arapiles, and it really struck me that there's a strong ethic in both of those places that, like Taipan Wall, for instance, is very much a mixed climbing area.
Yeah.
They'll put bolts in where bolt is needed, but if there's gear available, they'll use gear. And they're not afraid of big runouts, and it's not a like safe climbing haven where you should go and learn to climb.
Yeah.
But in some respects, I think you did learn to climb there. I mean, maybe not in the very beginning years, but how has the Taipan Wall in particular shaped how you approach climbing now?
Yeah. I guess what Taipan is and Arapalis and that sort of ethic that you talk about is a reflection of a time within Australian climbing, maybe more so than it being a geographical centre. Like it. And if you look at the first ascents that are done in those areas, they're quite often done by foreigners, people from out of state, probably more often than not. And so I guess it's a little bit more like this is the kind of the accepted way in which you do things in that area. Therefore, the people that develop routes there kind of just continue that same trend. And it's almost maybe because it hasn't had a really, really strong local scene that it hasn't really shifted into something else, like a bit more of a sport-orientated approach.
Sure, yeah.
But to answer your question about how it's shaped me, like, because it's a very real thing, like it's got a different style to it.
It feels like a whole different world up there.
Definitely, yeah. I think when you're young, especially, and you are looking at things that you want to do, you just see the challenges as being normal. It's like that's let's say Serpentine. It's a mixed climb with not amazing bolts and some big runouts. That's what I want to do.
And it's just to clarify for people who don't know Serpentine, it's also
pitch,
the second pitch up a big intimidating wall.
Definitely, yes.
And there are no anchors, right?
No, you jump off the top or top out or something.
Jump off and take this massive fall.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So it's not like it's just a pitch.
No, exactly.
There's quite a bit more to it.
For sure, yeah. And in being like that, you just rise to the challenge. You haven't got something to contrast that to. Like we didn't, it's not like, all right, I've grown up in maybe the Red or Rodayar or somewhere that's quite consumer orientated with quite a lot of bolts. You just that's what you do, and you just do it. Especially when you're young, you don't really think about what it isn't. You just there, solve the problem and get on with it. And then when you do go somewhere else, so like my first trip to Europe climbing in Sayou, so I remember having a chat with Dave Graham and Joe Kinder and I think Luke Parody at the time. Like we're just talking about how normal it is in Australia to kind of just, sometimes you have runouts or sometimes you got a shit bolt and, everyone else in the world is just like, oh my God, that's just unacceptable. Someone needs to get in there and fix that. You're like, oh yeah, well, I guess you could. And I guess I do that at my home crags, but I can also just get on with it.
Just do
it. Yeah. And so then say, how has that shaped my climbing further? It's like going to Yosemite and, doing something like El Nino ground up. There's pictures on that which is just like, all right, well, I haven't got gear here, but I'll just kind of make it happen, or things like that. You just kind of draw on that skill set which you kind of think is normal.
And that really kind of hit me when I was climbing on the Taipan Wall, because it seems out of left field almost when you just show up in Yosemite and are trying to go ground up on some notorious big wall, And I'm like, where in Australia are you preparing for that kind of thing? But then when I go see the Taipan Wall, it seems like a perfect breeding ground for the skills that you would need to run it out, to try hard way above gear, to be unsure of what's coming but quest up anyway.
Exactly. It's a headspace thing. It's not about trying to recreate a 3,000 foot vertical granite wall. That's not the thing that you need to be able to do. The thing that you need to be able to do is go outside of what is other people's comfort zones. So I don't feel like I go outside of my comfort zone. Something like El Cap, it's like actually just the comfort zone, my comfort zone kind of encompass that, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Which is a really interesting thing, and I really want to impress upon people listening something you just said, that whenever I have people come to me that want to train for a big wall or something, or a free attempt on some big line, their automatic sort of logical place to go is, oh, should I be doing 1 million laps on the tread wall? You know, and I'm like, no, I don't think that's what you need. I don't think that's where you should go.
It's not physical capacity they need.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to shut themselves down mentally way before they get shut down physically.
Yeah.
Most people.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting observation and a smart observation that you made.
Yeah.
To say that it's more about headspace.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think if you could, you know, put the pictures of a, you know, El Cap big wall side by side at a crag and get someone, all right, do this, then this, then this, then this, there'd be loads of people who could kind of do each of those pictures one after the other.
Yep.
Yeah. But put it in that situation where it's one on top of the other in a different environment, then things are very, very different.
Yeah, and you may not have the right piece of gear that you need for that moment. And
exactly.
Can you just keep climbing?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Those sorts of things. So a better breeding ground for that sort of objective might be someplace like Smith Rock or someplace where you have to deal with big runouts.
Yeah.
And just doing single pitches that push you outside of whatever your current Red River Gorge comfort zone is.
Yeah.
You know, push outside of that as training for these big objectives, more so than just more laps on the tread wall.
Most definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you were younger and taking those skills that you learned on Taipan, Arapiles, why not just go straight to hard sport climbing and stay there? I see lots of people do that once they have those abilities and they can push for bigger numbers on relatively safe things that they can get done relatively quickly. They're not nearly as involved.
Yeah.
Why not just go straight to that? Why stick to this? I think the hashtag that you use, Andrea, is Lee Cossey Adventures or something like that.
It's a bit of a piss take on me putting her in these epic situations.
I think I'm just a bit of a naive person, and I follow Lee on his quests for novelty.
For novelty, exactly. It's not some sort of, I don't know.
So we find ourselves in situations that are a bit of an adventure that probably wasn't necessarily planned.
Yeah, I guess the reason is, again, it's a little bit about that sort of moment in time and that sort of serendipitous nature of my exposure when I was younger. So that trad and adventure stuff is always on my radar. And I guess too, about the time, like we get a lot of sort of media from the UK as well. And so, and that mid to late 90s period, like the grit was really, really a big thing over there. And so this kind of idea that, okay, a good climber is someone who is not just, super strong on a bouldering wall, but that is relevant. They don't just do hard sport routes, but it's, they still can do that. They can do something that's bold. They can do something that's long. You can on-site something in a challenging environment. And that, I think, I've always been quite motivated to want to be as complete as possible. Maybe not so much because I want to be proficient, but I want that full gamut of experiences.
Yeah.
I don't want to go, before I went to Yosemite, for example, I didn't want to have not been there. I really, really wanted to go and be in that position that I saw Alex Huber on, Salathe on the front cover of Climbing Mag in the late 90s. And it's like, I want to see what that's like and give it a go.
Yeah, cool. And now you're coaching kids.
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to, or is there a way you can instill that same, or do you want to instill that same sense of adventure experience, hashtag adventures with Lee Cossey or Lee Cossey adventures into these kids?
Well, I think the big thing is like understanding that everyone will have a different reason for doing whatever they do, and everyone will have a different baseline for what is stimulating for them. You know, there's times where I kind of look back on my climbing and go, oh, you know, I would love to be able to borrow some of the methodicalness that, you know, peers of mine have. And, you know, that would be amazing for my sport climbing, and it would be amazing for my physical strength development. But that's not me. Like, I'm a really, really novelty seeking kind of person. And so I guess I recognize this in the kids as well. There's going to be people who want to do it all, and there's going to be people who, you know, really, really content, like just focusing in on one aspect of their climbing. And I just want to be there to make them feel like whatever they want to do is cool, and give them the opportunity, and make sure that if they do want to do something, that they don't look back on their kind of younger years and sort of wish for more exposure, I guess. So yeah.
That's really cool, taking the approach that just because I really value it doesn't mean this person does, and I'll help them move in the direction that they value.
Definitely. And just make sure that they know what's out there, and have a sense of what they can go and do if they wanted to do it. Yeah.
Cool. Andrea, you look like you really wanted to say something when he said novelty seeking, and I'm curious to know now what that was.
No, while you were talking about the preparation for Yosemite and kind of the contrast of doing laps on the tread wall, I think Lee should talk about how he prepared for Yosemite, and hopefully inspire some of the kids up here.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Right.
I mean, we're sitting in your little training dungeon down here.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I look like a modern day like fingerboard addict if you look around the training room.
Yeah. Well, we can have an addiction anonymous group together.
Totally.
I look the same way. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess Andrea is referring to kind of like, and
there's two situations I'm thinking of. There's
yeah,
the building your chocks and going out and trying echo crack, and then also the hand preparation before going to Yosemite as well.
Preparation.
Yeah. Well,
Does this involve a meat tenderizer or anything?
Not far
like
off it. So knowing that, so knowing that I was going to Yosemite, and that I had like very, very limited experience on big wall granite routes and crack climbing especially, I'm like, well, I don't want to go there and be completely ill-equipped. So went around kind of my local area trying to repeating the routes that I'd done, the crack climbs and multi-pitches and things, but they weren't super hard. So I thought, all right, we need to make it harder. So this one particular climb, Echo Crack, I thought, well, it's grade 25, so it's like 12A, B sort of grade, 4 pitches long, and the crux is kind of 2 pitches of fist cracks, like quite long pitches. It just eats number 3 Camelots. I'm like, well, we need to make this more challenging. So I thought, I'll make some wooden chocks just out of some building timber and some slings.
Yeah.
And let's do it at night, and hell, let's like do it bare feet as well. So I did this thing barefoot, fairly sharp crack.
I was following until you said bare feet, and now I'm thinking you're a little crazy.
But we don't do a heap of trad climbing at home, so I kind of had my sizes wrong. I just kind of lined up my hand next to a number 3 Camelot, and made the wooden chocks based on that. But I didn't really retract the cam enough. So when I got up there with the wooden chocks are like too big for most of the placements. I'm up there at night with a pretty average head torch, just sketching out with a foot wedged in a sharp crack. But it was awesome, because I guess I like that kind of the damage control, chaos management state of mind, and I find that a pretty empowering thing to kind of overcome. And so it's really, really good from a expanding my comfort zone point of view. And that was actually a really, really good experience for, going to Yosemite. It's like, there's all this adversity and can still overcome it and kind of make it happen.
But you used shoes on the Salothe.
I didn't do the Salothe, but did use Freerider, Golden Gate, El Nino and stuff. Yeah, definitely used shoes. Most of the climbing was by day, and I would say I had cams on me the whole time. Didn't take a wooden chocks yet. They probably posed a quarantine risk anyway.
But the Headspace was
exactly
a good place for you to understand.
Totally.
Lee Cossey here in Blackheath, we were talking about you last night when I was sort of prepping for this, and something he said really speaks to that sort of epic that you love to be in. He said, if I were in a strange situation where I couldn't climb myself out, it was going to be scary, it's going to be this massive epic. If I could choose a partner to appear next to me on the wall at that moment, it would be Lee Cossey every single time.
That's funny. Okay. Yeah. Probably not, by far not the strongest person that he knows, but maybe resourceful.
Yeah.
And have willingly put myself in many of those situations that he might find himself in the past. So.
Yeah. And what was the phrase you just used a minute ago about chaos and
damage control? So in those situations where you're confronted by lots of adversity, like that mindset that I'm in, it feels like you're kind of putting out 1,000 spot fires or something. I like that. I just really enjoy that sort of state of mind. There's no room for doubt or anything. You're just reacting, and it's the closest that I come to being in a flow state with climbing.
Yeah. Can we dig into that a little more? Because I see lots of people get into that sort of chaos, sort of frantic mode.
Yep.
And not be able to quiet it, to damage control it.
Yeah.
They give into it immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that as well a lot.
How did you move past that early on, or was that just something you were always good at?
No, I don't think I was always good at it. I can think back to moments where, like especially in my younger years at Arapiles, leading a trad route and just kind of like, not wanting to kind of keep going. I'm sure
when you were young, there's so much history here in Australia that I'm sure when you were young, you were coming up relatively quickly and then facing routes that were legendary, that you had built this myth up.
Definitely, yeah.
And that plays on your mind too, even before you're leaving the ground. So
yeah, definitely,
and adds to that sort of chaos.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that I ask myself a bit, and I often come up with different answers for it. Like I think there is an element of having worked through it pragmatically and using kind of my sort of strengths in kind of rationalization to kind of work through it. But to say it was just that would be to neglect something that's probably equally, if not more important, and that is that I was fortunate to, I guess, develop a sort of sense of identity as a climber around being able to do that. And so that became one of the things that I felt was like an intrinsic part of who I was as a climber. And then when you're thrown into that situation, you have a positive association with reacting a certain way.
Yeah.
And so once you, I guess, start to recognize that there is that resource that you've got, it's there to be tapped into.
Yeah.
And to kind of, I guess, to reflect on where I think it came from. I think it was a few, again, serendipitous moments where I got to be, like I was climbing in partnership as the stronger climber in that partnership, and was the one who kind of managed to kind of free the crux pitch of some multi-pitch and kind of get through and overcome some sort of adversity. And it was those fortunate moments where I guess that helped shape that identity. Yeah. And so I guess this is kind of going a step further, but like to kind of talk about how I would help facilitate that growth in someone else. You really need to set those kind of SMART goals, which are achievable, that are close to the edge of your comfort zone, but not beyond it, and need to kind of succeed and to start to expand that sense of identity into whatever comfort zone that is that you want to be able to handle.
Absolutely. I think sort of conditioning through immersion in a really smart way is the way to do it. And so often when and my wife and I actually fight about this all the time while we're climbing, because she gives into it very quickly, and I get really frustrated at that. I'm like, that was an opportunity. Like, you just blew your opportunity. And the way I feel is that when you have those scary moments, take stock of where you are. Most often early on when you're first encountering those scary moments, it's not like you're going to throw somebody right on this fist crack with bare feet and wooden chocks in the middle of the night, who's a new climber.
No.
Those scary moments are going to come when they're at a pretty good stance where they can really think about it and be a little more logical than that chaotic brain is allowing them to be. And if they can then push through that, they can use that success to create momentum for the next one, for the next one. And that doesn't mean every time you're going to push through. But as long as you build up this base of successes that you can pull on later, it's massive.
Exactly. And it's about creating the opportunities for that to happen. And I guess one thing I noticed looking around at different people often go from strength to strength, or the opposite. And it's usually the people who are the kind of stronger of a partnership, even if you've got two climbers who are fairly new, stronger, and I mean that kind of just in a general sense. Like, they're the ones that seem to identify more quickly with the climber that continues to grow. Whereas the ones who kind of identify as the ones as being less strong or less able stick with that identity. And so I think reflecting and being rational about the stories that you're telling yourself and that sort of thing has a really big role to play.
How often are you seeking out these epics?
I don't know, like the year before last, Andrea and I did loads of this sort of thing. Like, I guess mostly for Andrea's benefit. Like, we were preparing to go to Yosemite, and
did Andrea know it was for Andrea's benefit, or was Andrea like, why are you dragging me on these epics?
She understands my understands my theories with it. And we'd decided to go to Yosemite, so she was like all for it.
And this was in preparation for Free
This
Rider.
is in preparation for going to try Free Rider. I suppose in that preparation, what was more important for me was that mental side of things and being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. So Lee probably would have benefited more from fingerboarding and training, whereas I kind of needed that time being comfortable on trad gear again and multi-pitches and run-outs.
And even just like the logistics of moving around on a big wall. So we finished bolting like this 10-pitch route together and ended up sort of sending that, so that was kind of good preparation as well, just bolting in that sort of few 100-meter cliff and things like that.
So despite it being a sport climb, essentially, it still felt pretty adventurous. The rock was not amazing and slightly traversy, and you're uncomfortable because you're tired and it's dark and whatnot. But I think lucky for me, I've got a partner that I can trust to help in situations and learn from.
You can transport him there in the middle of the night when you're out of gear and you're barefoot.
Exactly. But Andrea is like a really willing sufferer. Like, yes, she.
That's pretty important, actually.
It's so important.
You say that sort of in jest and laughing, but it's a really important part of doing.
Totally.
big,
I'll
hard
laugh
things.
at anyone suffering on a cliff.
I laugh at myself suffering on a cliff.
But, you know, she's so willing to suffer and so willing to just like, you know, there is only one way. It's a one-way street, and that street is like, you know, to the next belay or to the next ledge or whatever. And yeah, that's a massive asset. So
Yeah.
like, even though she hadn't had a lot of experience, knowing that we were going to spend the best part of 6 months doing some multi-pitches and some trad climbing, like I knew that it was going to result in her having more than enough skills to, you know, do free rider, which she did ground up anyway in the end.
Yeah.
But I think that preparation, it's good. Like it's those SMART goals before you go there. Like you kind of,
Yep.
yeah, tick those things off. Just like if you're training for a sport climb of grade, I don't
Whatever,
know,
yeah.
whatever, you kind of want to tick off the grades leading up to that. It's just like with your trad climbing, you want to tick off the other components of it.
Yeah, and you're both very interested in the physical side of training as well. So you aren't totally dropping away all physical training while working on skills.
Not
Is
at
that
all. Like I
correct?
think both of us with our backgrounds, our baseline is our kind of, you know, natural way of thinking is, how is this loading my body? And that, like Andrea's an exercise physiologist and I'm a physio, like our day in, day out job is to write programs for people to overcome whatever barriers or injuries or, you know, achieve whatever goals they have. And we're doing that anywhere up to kind of 12, 15 times a day. And so it kind of, that's just kind of the known thing that's always happening in the background. And it's, we in this conversation, obviously we're talking about the mental preparation a lot. But
I just wanted to highlight that it's not like this is the only thing
No.
we're doing.
No, I think
Not
I
at all.
did my hardest boulder problem that same year as well.
Yeah.
So you're still kind of doing that concurrently.
Totally. Yeah.
So when you are really stuck into a sport climbing goal or a bouldering goal where the mental side of it doesn't necessarily rely on these epics, are you still seeking these things out on a hobby sort of level?
Yeah, like outside of climbing, you mean, or just doing it as a side?
Just
thing?
as a side part of climbing.
Yeah, yes and no. Like, I think often I'll go quite, you know, months or even a year without doing some sort of like epic. But I do still crave
Is that true, Andrea, or is he exaggerating there? Is it more like 3 days?
I think there's always a bit of chaos in our life, but it's not always climbing.
You can find the chaos elsewhere.
Yeah. So we've
which
got,
is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I do like that. Like I'll, you know, will routinely take on more than I can handle. Yeah. And I guess that's an element of kind of wanting that novelty. And so
it's another support group we should start.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Totally. It's like, yeah, I'll do that. It's like, oh, there's opportunity over there. Yeah, I'll do that. And, you know, before long you're trying to juggle 100 balls. And it's probably an asset as well as it being a weakness of mine. And an asset in that it keeps life interesting and I put myself out there for different things, but certainly, you know, you can crash and burn when you take on too much. Mm-hmm. That certainly happens at times. Yeah.
Does the business that you two run together, it's Move Clinic, right? Yeah. And are there other businesses tied into that, or is that all sort of encompassing?
We also run a bouldering wall called Camp Street Climbing. So the two of us run that with another couple.
Yeah. Okay. And then Move Clinic is our physiotherapy, exercise physiology business.
Right. Yeah. Did that all get started in the midst of other chaos?
Pretty much. Yeah. Like, I think I might have been training for a marathon at the time. Was there something just as a side note? But yeah, then we kind of brought together kind of our own sole practitioner businesses into one, and then now we've kind of got a few employees and partners and things like that in that business. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that's the way a lot of small business that's going to be successful starts is kind of in the midst of lots of other chaos, and then it just remains some level of chaos. And it looks really, it has this amazing facade when you're looking in from the outside, but the owners, the people who are making it run, sort of always have a little bit of chaos going on. I think that's almost necessary.
I it frustrates me because I love the idea of like the neatness and everything being super systematized.
The really clean system.
Yeah, but I'm starting to kind of, I guess, accept that maybe that's not so much my nature. And what the things that I've done that I'm kind of proud of have certainly come out of that asset of mine, which is to kind of go in and have a go. And so it's just kind of understanding, I guess, the limitations of chaos and
it's an organized chaos.
Exactly, curbing it with that organization a little.
So something else I find really interesting in terms of like Move Clinic and your physio background is that in the States, at least from my observation, a lot of the people who, at least traditionally, it's definitely changing. There are people like Nick Berry and quite a few people now, but it used to be that the older generation of trad climbers and the bold ethic sort of climbers didn't at all believe in training and those sorts of things. It's interesting because there was like the really, like the Camp 4 Stone Master guys who were really into it. But then there was this level of like old trad dad kind of guys who were like, we never trained for climbing, you know? But you've definitely stuck into it so much that it's become your study at uni and your, see, I just used an Australian term there, uni. And
college. I went to college.
And then now it's your career. Was there any sort of, I mean, first off, does that other ethic exist here? That
absolutely, yeah. There's a strong culture of this sort of dirtbag, which from the outside is easy to kind of say, oh, they're too cool to train. It's like, training is uncool, right? And so there is definitely that culture. I was just talking about this with my brother Ben a few days ago, and like our generation, so like getting into climbing in the late 90s and stuff, is probably one of the last generations where a dirtbag teenager was also a really, really passionate trainer. Nowadays, like, I guess the young dirtbags almost seem to shy away from that training and kind of be like, oh no, I'm just I'm out there to just rock climb. It's this experiential thing. Exactly. Or you've got the performance orientated youth climbers who are very, very gym focused, comp focused, and don't do the outdoor stuff. And like it makes sense. Where I am now is complete reflection of kind of the things that I've always loved, and so I'm pretty lucky and very excited to kind of be where I am in this position. But I guess I would love to see the next generation kind of find that balance again. Like, obviously, it's a choice to kind of dirtbag it if you want, but that's also a really beautiful thing at a certain time in life. Yeah, totally. But to not feel like, there's a fixed identity around that. So you can dirtbag, you can have your fingerboard in your backpack or on the side of your car, you can still train. Like,
I think it can be quite limiting if you identify too closely with just the one component of the climbing. Like, so often I've seen people say, oh, why are you training in just sport climbing? Where it's at is trad climbing. Right. But I think with having the background of the training and the sport climbing, it massively opens the door for more trad climbing.
And you get to do the coolest routes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, if you can do it all.
If we didn't do the training and the sport climbing, I wouldn't have had the strength and the ability to get up a route like Free Rider or even some of the other trad routes in the country, something like the totem pole.
Yeah.
Like if I didn't have that sport background, that trad route, that
Too hard. Yeah.
wouldn't have been possible. So if there can be a bit more of a balance and acceptance that both have their role, I think you're going to have more enjoyment out of both sides.
Definitely. Yeah. Just being open-minded. Like there is no, you don't sign up to one particular identity as a climber or as a human in general. You just do what you feel like doing. And if that is, doing everything, that's great. If it's doing one thing because that's what you want to do, then that's all cool. But yeah, not feeling like there's a fixed camps that you need to assign to.
Yeah, I really like that you both use the word identity when you're talking about this. And I've been limited by that identity thought myself. I feel like I've done all of this climbing thing backwards. I started as a gym climber, where lots of people do, but then pretty immediately went to trad climbing, identified as a trad climber. I'm not clipping bolts. If there's gear nearby, I'm not touching that bolt. I'm not even going to look at it.
Yeah.
You're lucky I don't chop it.
Yeah.
That kind of attitude. And then I went full on sport climber. Like, why do I need to boulder? I've got good technique,
Yeah.
And now I'm going more toward bouldering. So I'm doing it very backwards. I should have bouldered when I was 20. But that identity has definitely been something I've thought quite a bit about recently, because I have the skills of a trad climber, a sport climber. Now I'm a boulder. Can I call myself a boulder if I have all those skills and if I exercise them somewhat regularly?
Yeah.
So I like the term climber more than
Exactly.
I like, the boulder or sport climber. And some people do have those, like you said, it's totally fine if that's
Focus.
what you want to do,
Yeah.
if that's how you want to identify, great. But to be a well-rounded climber, identifying as one of those things can be really, really limiting.
Absolutely, yeah. And you definitely see it time and time again where people confined by that sense of identity, and that's sometimes even created by the people around them. I think you see it with, you're weak, or you're just a pumper, or you're not strong, and that can really limit someone, and that's not even a construct of their own doing. So
yeah, it's really interesting. So now that you're like, I don't want to say, you're definitely not the old guard of Australia yet. You're getting there. You'll be there.
37, yeah, as of 2 weeks ago.
Well, happy belated birthday. But now that you've matured quite a bit over your earlier years of climbing, and you've gotten to see all of this change in the sport, and now you're coaching kids, how has Lee Cossey changed from punk kid, who I'm sure you and your brother wreaked havoc on quite a few old guard back then, how has your attitude toward climbing changed? Or is it pretty much the same attitude, just in a more mature vessel?
I think personally, what I'm motivated toward, with my own climbing has changed. I think if I look back on, what I was motivated to do when I was younger, it sort of feels like you're never really looking too far from what's around you. You're like, all right, I want to do that. And you have a very fixed way of thinking about your goals. Whereas now I feel like, all right, there's this kind of huge landscape of things that I could do, and they're not necessarily like objectives, but the objectives now might be, all right, I want to pursue that feeling that I get when I go trad climbing it, or go on-site climbing or something like that. And that's more of a pursuing some sort of experience. Or I might go, all right, there is a real hallmark route that I want to get done at some point, and that'll try and factor that into my life over a few year period. So I guess I look at it from my own perspective as a bigger picture process,
Yeah.
which is definitely healthier. because otherwise you're just going to get swept up in whatever's happening, and what you do is very reflective of what's going on around you, and I don't really want that to be the case. I want what I do to be reflective of things I value. So from an experience point of view, or from a life achievement kind of ascent point of view.
Wow, that's a really fucking great answer to a convoluted question.
Okay. The other side of it is how I look at climbing now, when I kind of, I guess in the context of being a coach or a mentor or something like that, and I think in a way that although my experience as a youth were amazing, and I came through the sport a really, really important time for myself, and my lessons were reflective of that time, I want to make sure that the kids that I kind of work with now, how do I put it? I guess I want to make sure that they are in no way limited by my way of looking at things. And so that means I kind of need to reflect on, the stories that I either tell myself or that I have been telling, and make sure that there aren't any pitfalls in that.
Right.
And there always will be. And I'm sure I'll reflect on this time and go, oh yeah, could have done that differently. But I know from my experience, there's a lot of things that, were known truths when I was growing up that are now kind of, okay, that's complete rubbish.
Yeah.
And so I want to sort of, I guess, encourage them to be, constructively critical of the things that are going on around them. Think about things, think about what they want to do, not just as climbers, but as humans in general. And I guess just impart that kind of, I guess longer term view of climbing.
Yeah, I love that you talked about sort of chasing the experience. And I think that's a not well, maybe not understood isn't the right word, but for instance, my whole plan coming to the Taipan Wall, knowing I'm going to be way out of shape, my body's beaten up from being on the road for so long, but I've been playing it I've been playing it very safe for the last several years, and I really just want to get scared. Like I want to be in a position to push through some fear a few times. So climbing on Taipan for me was much less about I want to send a route. This trip was all about I just want to push the boundaries of my comfort zone again, where I haven't in a long time. And I think it's tough for people to grasp that.
I agree.
Because everyone I've talked to is like, well, but did you do groovy? And I'm like, no, I didn't do it.
It's not what I was trying to do.
That wasn't the point at all. I would love to come back and try to do it at some point. But this trip was more about let's get scared up there. And that may, frankly, especially this trip, because I've played it so safe for so long, it didn't take much for me to get freaked out a little bit. My first run up groovy was first day at the Taipan, blazing sun, really hot, and
it's
I grabbed
super slippery,
those first slopers at the, first, second bolt there. And I'm like, holy shit.
And you've got to push on something that feels like a skate ramp or something.
Exactly. So I'm immediately terrified, and then the next day I went to the top of groovy. And it's kind of heady up there, even though it's safe falls.
Absolutely.
It's kind of heady, and pushing through those falls, pushing through there was enough for me. And I actually went up with a stick clip. And there's that sort of run out at the second to third bolt where you're climbing on those slopers. And the first day up there, that section felt horrendous. So the next day, I'm like, I'm taking a stick clip up. I'm going to clip that third bolt. But then the stick clip wouldn't reach.
I was going to say, did it actually reach?
Shit. Okay. This is why I'm here. Deep breath, climb through it, and it was fine.
But that's it. And I think quite often people look back on the things that are the most powerful memories for them, or the most formative experiences, and they're they weren't necessarily ascents. They were feelings, or they were and so, or far too infrequently, we don't make our goals experience based. We make them headline based, if you want to put it like that. I did such and such in this many goes, or but yeah, I think you've got to kind of balance those goals out with the ones where, all right, I want to feel like I expand my sense of identity as a climber, or I get scared, or I have this experience, or I climb in this place, or I do something with a friend, or that sort of thing. And I think they're the things that you look back on and feel as much, if not more, satisfaction with as you do with your kind of bigger sense.
Yeah, we were just at Arapiles, and we went to do Katoomba because we have to.
Yep.
I can't go to Arapiles. I can't come to Australia and not do Katoomba.
Yeah.
And there's a big crew, I think from Cairns,
okay,
on Katoomba.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that they're all intimidated.
Yeah.
And they like hang at the corner of the roof and
Yeah.
psych themselves up to climb out the roof. And I watched one guy in particular. I watched him pretty closely, and I could hear the fear in his breathing, and I could see it in his face, and he just kept pushing through. And turned the lip, shaking a little, and definitely afraid of it, and strength failing a little bit, but turned the lip and kept climbing. And
awesome.
And even though he hung on the gear at the corner, for me, that looked like getting to witness this formative moment.
Yeah, definitely. Like he will never not look back on that experience and think of it, as a nothing thing. It's like
totally.
Yeah, it's really cool to see that. And I think trying to bring that experience into your climbing is a really, really valuable way to set your goals. Yeah, absolutely. And I to sort of backtrack a little bit on something I started to ask about before, the coaching kids thing now, and teaching them to value these experiences and giving them the opportunity to recognize that these experiences are out there. Yeah.
I know you've been working with Angie Scarth Johnson a little, and I haven't had the opportunity to see it yet, but there's a new North Face film out.
Oh, yeah.
About you taking her out and teaching her to bolt routes and things like that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, and why is Angie even interested in that sort of thing, and what's that mentor role look like for you?
Yeah. So I've kind of worked on and off with Angie for a few years, a lot more in the last sort of 6 months or so. But this project, this Tonga video project, was a sort of side thing to the training. She wanted to go and do some route development, and this had been in the back of her mind for a while. But
how old is Angie?
Angie's 14.
14?
Yeah.
And so first off, there aren't many women interested in developing.
Yeah.
I'm glad that field is growing.
Yeah.
What possessed her to want to be involved in that?
Yeah, so there's two elements to it. One is that there was this kind of like, simmering kind of interest in developing some climbing. Mm-hmm. And then she found out about some new development that was happening in Tonga, which is where her father's from. And so Tonga is an island in the South Pacific, a tiny island of about 100,000 people. And she kind of thought, oh, wow, there's development there. I've always wanted to do some route development. We should try and do a trip there. And so got in touch with one of the early developers who actually made a small film about it as well. And from there, the ball got rolling to kind of make a little film project. In the end, I ended up kind of coming onto the project, partly because I'm also an ambassador for North Face, but also too just because I'm good friends with Angie and it worked out well. And so, yeah, it was very much her idea, her kind of goal to go, all right, let's go and check out what it's like to boulder climb and do it in a new place. And yeah, I guess I couldn't really feel more privileged to be able to just be a part of that. Yeah. It's a simple role from my point of view. It's like, well, okay, we go and put some bolts in things. But I guess for her point of view, it's worked out really well.
Was there someone for you other than your uncle who played a similar role?
Definitely, yeah. So I started climbing with a group of people who were already doing some route development. And the way that kind of my peer group, I guess, thought about climbing was that we were always thinking about, what other climbs could be done. And so the people around me, especially one guy in particular, Justin Clark, he did a lot of bolting. And so, it was his drill, his glue, his bolts that I first used to put up my first few routes when I was still at high school. Yeah. And I guess I'm very, very grateful for the experience and exposure that I had at a super young age. And I can sort of see how much it helped to make my climbing life more rich, and I'm really, really happy to be able to help other people in that way.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that somebody like yourself who values the experience is also mentoring and pushing that, paying that forward, so to speak, because it's definitely really easy to just say, I want only my own experiences. I value my time climbing, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with other people, teaching other people. I would rather enjoy it myself. Yeah.
But there's this kind of like, constant debate about what is altruism. And, when you say that, I'm like, well, gosh, I get so much from the days that I spend, in Tonga with Angie, sort of teaching her kind of what I know about bolting, and every couple of nights a week when I work with the kids, I go away from those sessions like super inspired, and enriched. And it's not so much about feeling like, it's good to give back, but it is like truly enriching for me in those moments. So like I can see the value in it for them, and I am definitely motivated to do it because I want to help them, but I can't say that it's that it doesn't serve me at the same time.
Sure.
It just happens to be mutually beneficial, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing about it, is that for me, like, coaching has been surprisingly rewarding.
Yeah.
When I remember the moment when a client of mine sent their first 7C plus, really early on. Yeah. And recognizing, like, sort of stepping out of my body and recognizing I just got as much enjoyment out of that as I did when I sent my first 7C plus. And thinking, wow, I've just opened myself up to this huge well of joy over the next who knows how long. That doesn't require me fingerboarding anymore. So
totally. And it's a discovery. It's and it's like, I guess, we're talking about novelty before. It's another way to have some form of joy or thrill, and I love it more and more the more time I spend doing it.
So before we wrap this up, I know I totally skipped over it, and I want to go back to it before we leave here. I need to know about this hand conditioning that Andrea talked about before Yosemite. Yeah.
So as I said, we didn't have many cracks in Australia, and I've looked at the kind of backs of the hands of some of the climbers that I've seen who have done a lot of crack climbing, and they're thick and leathery, and I'm like, oh, okay, that doesn't bode well if I sort of start shoving my hand in granite cracks for a long way. The
Japanese are going to be really interested in this right now, by the way.
Yes, they certainly are. Yeah. I think wide boys are currently trying to make themselves create more business for themselves at the moment, but I'm sure there's going to be some volumes heading to Japan. But no, I was getting a sharp nail and basically just like scratching the backs of my hands, getting to scab up a little bit and sort of stimulating that, a little bit of
thicker skin
adaptation.
Callousing,
the only reason
new nail, rusty nail.
Well, actually, it had sharpened it, so it was pretty clean. But the problem,
sharper nails than a
but the
normal
problem
nail.
with that was that I also was doing a lot of training at the time, and I was probably a little bit run down. And then I happened to go climbing at an area which is kind of known for its kind of grubbiness. Really good climbing though. This is Nowra. And I came back from that weekend with not just kind of a scabby back of the hand, but like a puffy. It had become infected.
No.
And so the backs of my hands were now infected. But thankfully, I think I still had about 4 weeks before I went away. So that resolved. And it definitely worked. Definitely had tougher skin.
Andrew
on the back
doesn't
of my
look
hands.
so convinced.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it seems to have worked.
It definitely worked.
I think
Did you
people
employ
use
the
tape
nail
gloves.
when you were preparing for Freerider?
Oh, no. I think I learned from people's past experiences. I didn't feel like I needed to do that, fortunately.
Also, too, she judges some of my kind of preparation a little bit skeptically, and yeah,
Well, I don't blame her.
yeah, probably fair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, awesome, man. I appreciate hugely. You know, I had very, very limited time back in Blackheath, and I'm like, I'm just gonna message Lee relentlessly if he doesn't get back to me. So I'll just show up at his house one morning. But I'm glad you.
no, it's
agreed.
been fun. Yeah, no, it's great to sit down and have a chat about climbing. It's always
Cool.
good.
Awesome. We should definitely do it again when I'm back here.
For sure.
I'll be in Blackheath again. I'm 100% positive of that.
Awesome.
And I'd love to dig more into the nerdy side of your
Oh
training.
yeah,
So,
for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Love to.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Cool. Thank you.
You know, I wish that all of you could have been there and seen this little training dungeon laboratory that Lee has in his basement. Keep in mind here, he runs a clinic as well as a climbing gym, but in his own basement is this laboratory full of interesting tools and, you know, the manifestations of Lee's philosophies around training for climbing. And that's one of the things I find most fascinating about Lee, is that he's this rare blend of understands and respects the science, but is also willing to experiment and, you know, let his quirky ideas take over. They're not all going to work. Some do, some don't. And I think he would agree with that as well. But the important thing is that he's experimenting. He's out there looking for every little edge he can find in order to get better. And that, you know, that includes the mental side, the philosophical side, as well as the physical side. And that is exactly what makes Lee Cossey one of the best all-around climbers on the planet. So Lee, thanks again hugely for sitting down with me, for taking the time out. Thank you, Andrea, as well. Your perspective was invaluable in this episode, and I'm looking forward to one with you. And I can't wait to come back and talk to you again, Lee, and hang out in your training laboratory and hear more of these crazy, quirky, and effective ideas that you have. For all of you out there, if you are in the San Francisco area, again, August 16th to 18th, I'll be at Bridges Rock Gym. Nate and I teaching a coaching, youth athlete, and parents workshop. Check out the Bridges Rock Gym website, or there are links right there in your pocket supercomputer in the show notes for this episode. And then if you're in Minneapolis, Wednesday, August 21st, 7:30, I'll be at MBP presenting about all the amazing things I've learned from 200 plus hours of conversations with experts on this podcast. Come out and see me, hang out with me afterward. I would love to meet everyone and just chat a little. So if you are in neither one of those places, you know where to find us, powercompanyclimbing.com. You can find us on the Instagrams, the Facebooks, and the Pinterest at Power Company Climbing. And you can look for us on the Twitter. Search all you want. You're not going to find us, not even in Australia, because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
Power. time to build power. This 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 time to build this time to build this time to build this time to build this time